Hello again, welcome back to the Telltale channel. Today we have a special bonanza of 5 Thomas and Friends stories for you to enjoy. To start we have Thomas and the Treasure, followed by Calling All Engines, then Danger at the Dieselworks, Thomas and the Castle, and finally Misty Island Rescue. Be sure to pay close attention to the stories and watch them all the way to the end for the fun quizzes and fun facts. Please remember you can help the channel grow by just clicking the subscribe button. It's 100% free. Thomas and the Treasure. Brendam Docks is a very busy place. Engines bring freight cars, cranes unload cargo, and ships bring visitors. One day, Thomas had to collect a very important visitor, the Admiral. Thomas was to take the Admiral to open the new Maritime Museum. It was a museum all about the sea. Salty was excited. The Admiral is always looking for the lost pirate treasure of Sodor, he said. Pirates, scoffed James. Treasure, huffed Emily. Yes, said Salty, but no one has ever found it. Salty told them there were 3 clues. First, find the eagle of the mountains. Its beak will point to the clouds and not in the sky. Then those clouds will lead to the skull and crossbones. And there you'll find the treasure, me hearties. Eagle, clouds, skull, and crossbones, Thomas tooted excitedly. I'm sure I could solve those clues. Emily and James thought it was all nonsense, and that made Thomas cross. Just then, the Admiral arrived. Thomas puffed off to collect him. The Admiral had to be at the museum in time for the grand opening. Thomas felt very proud to be taking him. What if I arrived with the Admiral and a chest of pirate treasure, thought Thomas. That would show James and Emily. So Thomas chuffed onto the track away from the museum and set off into the mountains to look for the first clue. How could an eagle point the way, wondered Thomas. How could clouds not be in the sky? And Thomas knew he had never seen a skull and crossbones anywhere. Later Emily puffed towards Thomas. There's no such thing as treasure, she laughed. But Thomas paid no attention. The eagle of the mountains had to be somewhere. Then he saw something wonderful, a mountain that looked like an eagle. Thomas was very excited. I found the first clue, he hooted happily. Now I'll find the next one. The eagle's head would point the way. Suddenly Thomas saw a track leading in the direction of the stone beak. Where are you going, Thomas, wished James. To find the clouds that are not in the sky, whistled Thomas. How silly, snorted James, and he chuffed away. But Thomas didn't mind. He knew the clouds were here somewhere. And then he saw them. The clouds not in the sky were reflections of clouds in the lake. I found the second clue, wished Thomas excitedly. One more and I'll find the treasure. Thomas looked for a long time, and he forgot all about the Admiral. Then Harold arrived with Sir Topham Hatt. The Admiral is late for the opening of the museum, he boomed crossly. You have been unreliable, added Sir Topham Hatt. Harold will now take the Admiral to the museum. Thomas felt very foolish. If only he hadn't spent so much time looking for the clues. Fancy believing in a silly old story, laughed Harold. Everyone thinks I'm silly, huffed Thomas, but I still believe there's treasure. Thomas puffed sadly along the track away from the lake. Thomas had never been this way before, so he didn't know where it would lead. It led him into a tunnel. At last Thomas came to the end of the line. He was surprised. There were all the other engines, and there was the Admiral. I am very proud to declare the new Maritime Museum open, he announced. Everyone cheered and whistled. Then Thomas saw something even more exciting. That's it, Thomas tooted. The pirate's treasure's right here. Don't be silly, huffed Emily. Everyone knows it's just a silly old story, snorted James, but Thomas knew he was right. I followed all the clues, he puffed proudly. And you have found the skull and crossbones, cried the Admiral. Everyone was surprised. Someone get me a shovel, the Admiral was so excited, he dug for the pirate treasure himself. He found a big wooden chest, inside was the pirate treasure. The pirate treasure will be the most important thing in the whole museum, said the Admiral. Thomas, boomed Sir Topham Hatt, you have made this the best opening ever. Thomas was very proud, he had been right to believe in Salty's story. He had found the treasure. The end. Stay tuned for the next story, Duncan's Bluff. It was wintertime on the island of Sodor. Duncan was busy puffing through the White Mountains and the frosty forests. He was proud to be a narrow-gauge engine. Duncan was delivering coal to the villages. They were going to need extra coal from the main coaling plant. So James and Thomas brought coal to the wharf. Duncan chuffed in to talk to James. You were a long time getting here, teased Duncan. You're lucky I came at all, wished James crossly. I've got an important job to do later. I'm taking some children to a concert. Oh, is doing 2 jobs in one day too hard for you? Duncan chuffed cheekily. Par, snorted James, I can do more jobs in one day than you can. I'm really useful. This made Duncan cross. How about a wee contest, chuffed Duncan. I bet I can take more coal to the villages faster than you can deliver it. All right, puffed James, you're on. I'll show you who's fastest, chuffed Duncan, but Duncan was worried. James was big and strong. I hope I can be as fast as James, he puffed nervously. So Duncan delivered all his coal as fast as he could. Must beat James, he puffed. But when Duncan arrived back at the wharf, James was waiting for him. I told you mainline engines were the fastest, teased James. Duncan looked at the long line of freight cars. There was plenty of coal for the villages there. But Duncan didn't want to lose. Oh, is this all you brought, he tooted. The villages need lots more coal than that. Then I'll bring more coal than you have ever seen, puffed James. James raced back to the coaling plant, and Duncan delivered the coal to the villages. Now all the villages had plenty of coal. Duncan puffed back to the wharf. But when Duncan arrived at the wharf, there were still lots more coal cars waiting, so Duncan decided to play a trick. I'll hide the coal cars before James gets back, he puffed. Soon all the cars were hidden. Now James will think I've delivered all the coal, Duncan chuffed cheerfully. James had collected lots more freight cars from the coaling plant. He was puffing harder than he had ever puffed before, and he was using lots of coal. At last James arrived at the wharf. There was Duncan. You still haven't brought enough coal, teased Duncan. I thought you were supposed to be really useful. I'll soon be back with so much coal, puffed James. It will take you all winter to deliver it. Oh, we'll see, puffed Duncan. James still had to take the children to the concert, but he had been puffing so hard, he had used up all the coal in his tender, and soon he ground to a halt. That evening, the narrow-gauge controller came to see Duncan. James is stuck. He has run out of coal, he announced. Now he won't be able to take the children to the concert. Duncan felt terrible. He thought about all the coal cars he had hidden, he thought about James, and then he thought about the children. I have to tell you about the hidden coal cars, he wished. The narrow-gauge controller listened hard. You have caused delay and confusion, he said slowly, but you have told the truth, and a useful engine always tells the truth. I'll only be a really useful engine if I can help James, whistled Duncan, so Duncan collected one of the coal cars he had hidden. Snow started to fall. Duncan rattled along the icy tracks until at last, Duncan found James. What are you doing here, snorted James. I played a trick on you, chuffed Duncan. I didn't take all the coal to the villages, I hid it from you. You are the fastest and a really useful engine, Duncan added, but James told Duncan that he was a really useful engine too. You brought the coal to me so quickly, I will still be able to take the children to the concert, he puffed. Thank you, Duncan. The coal was quickly loaded into James' tender. Soon his fire was roaring and his boiler was as warm as toast. He steamed off to collect the children. Duncan felt happy. James is a really useful engine, puffed Duncan. Ah, but then so am I, and he chuffed happily away to deliver more coal to the snowy villages. The end. Stay tuned for the next story, Seeing the Sights. There are lots of wonderful sights to see on the island of Sodor. One summer's day, Thomas was given a very special job. Thomas, said Sir Topham Hatt, you are to collect some very important visitors from the mainland. They are arriving at Brendam Docks. Yes, sir, tooted Thomas happily. I will show them all the sights on Sodor. Thomas puffed happily towards Brendam Docks. Thomas pulled up at the gangplank. Welcome aboard, he tooted. I will show you all the wonderful sights of Sodor. Just then Gordon steamed in. I should be showing the sights to the important visitors, he sniffed. Why, huffed Thomas. Because, wheezed Gordon, I could show them round much more quickly than you, then they would see everything there is to see on Sodor. Thomas was cross. I can show them all the sights just as quickly as you can, he whistled. Just you wait and see. Thomas heard passenger car doors slam. Everyone's on board, he thought, and he chuffed away as quickly as he could. So much to see, so much to see, let's get a move on, count on me. Then there was trouble. Thomas had left some of the visitors behind. Later, Thomas had to wait at a signal. Bertie the bus drove up. He had picked up the visitors Thomas had left behind. Bertie honked his horn, but the signal had changed and Thomas puffed away. Thomas was in a hurry. Silly tank engine, puffed Bertie, I will have to chase after you. The children on board Bertie thought a chase was great fun. Thomas arrived at Black Lock. Everyone out to see the seals, he tooted. Hurry up, hurry up. The visitors took their cameras to see Black Lock. Thomas had to wait. He didn't like waiting. He had to show the visitors all the sights, otherwise he thought, I won't be as fast as Gordon. Soon Thomas arrived at the Scottish castle. Everyone out, he peeped. Hurry up, hurry up. Then Thomas had to wait again. He wheezed some steam, and he started to worry. We'll never see everything if we don't hurry up. Thomas wheezed, everyone back on board, please. Time to go, he peeped loudly. Thomas heard a passenger car door slam. Everyone must be on board, he thought, and Thomas chuffed away as fast as he could, but Thomas had left more of the visitors behind. Just then, Gordon steamed in. Flatten my funnel, sniffed Gordon, you haven't seen many sights. Yes, we have, and we're going to see more, huffed Thomas. He was cross. He puffed away as quickly as he could, but more visitors were left behind. Thomas steamed into the fishing village. Here's the next sight, he puffed. Everybody out, please, but Thomas couldn't hear any passenger car doors opening. He was puzzled. Just then Bertie arrived. What's happening, asked Thomas. No one's getting out, Thomas beeped Bertie, because no one is left on board. Thomas was surprised. Cinders and ashes, gasped Thomas. You were in so much of a hurry, you left them all behind. Thomas was upset. I must go back and pick everyone up, but first he collected the visitors from Bertie the bus. And he steamed back to the castle. He picked up his passengers, and puffed quickly back to Black Lock. With all the visitors on board, Thomas set off again. Thomas had to stop at a junction. He looked at the view of the sea. It was beautiful. "I wish we could just stay here all day," Thomas wished. "There are so many things to do." The visitors looked out of the windows. Their faces smiled when they saw blue sea and the golden yellow sand. Suddenly Thomas had an idea. "We will stay here all day," he whistled. The visitors had a lovely time, making sand castles, riding donkeys, and eating ice creams. Thomas was very happy. "You won't see all the sights eating ice creams," sniffed Gordon. "It's better to see one place properly than lots of places in a hurry," Thomas chuffed happily. And all the visitors agreed. The end. Fun fact. The rocket was the world's first famous locomotive. The rocket, built in 1829 by George and Robert Stephenson, looked more like a kettle on wheels than today's sleek trains. But it was a star. It won a big race called the Rainhill Trials by going a whopping 30 miles per hour, proving steam engines were the future of transport. Were you paying close attention to the story? Try the fun quiz. Who was Thomas meant to take to the Maritime Museum? The answer is the Admiral. Who tried to tell Thomas that he had left passengers behind? The answer is Bertie the bus. What did Duncan hide from James? The answer is the coal trucks. Fun fact. Mallard is the fastest steam locomotive ever. The Mallard is a record-breaking train that zoomed at 126 miles per hour in 1938. It was painted a shiny blue and had a streamlined shape that made it look like it was built for speed. Even today, no other steam train has beaten its record. Summer is a busy time on the island of Sodor. The engines love to show travelers around the island. They visit the seaside, the windmill, and the new Sodor suspension bridge. One morning, Sir Topham Hatt came to the shed. He had a very important announcement to make. "A new airport is to be built on Sodor and I need you all to help." The engines were very excited. Thomas and Percy were coupled to freight cars full of bricks and timber to take to the airport building site. Imagine all the travelers chuffed Thomas, and all the airplanes puffed Percy. Then Harry and Bert arrived. "Stinky steamies in the way again," mumbled Harry. "Why do we have to work near them?" grumbled Bert. This made Thomas and Percy cross. They didn't want to work near the Diesels either. The Diesels were oily, and they seemed very different to the steamies. Thomas, Percy, Harry, and Bert worked at the airport all afternoon. They shunted freight cars full of bricks and tar. The Diesels bumped Thomas and biffed Percy. "Dirty Diesels," moaned Percy, "I don't like them." Thomas and Percy had been so excited about working at the airport, but Harry and Bert were there and now it wasn't any fun. That night, a hurricane swept through the island. It was the strongest wind the engines had ever known. All night long the wind howled down the tracks. It tore down the trees and ripped off roofs. The next morning, Thomas gasped at what he saw. "Bust my buffers," he cried, "look at what the wind has done." The seaside had been battered, the windmill was wrecked, and the Sodor suspension bridge had collapsed. Thomas felt terrible. Sir Topham Hatt came to see the engines. "The hurricane has done lots of damage," he said sadly. "Everyone will have to work even harder if we want to open the airport." Edward and Henry brought bricks to the airport building site while Diesel arrived with a load of timber, but the Diesels weren't talking to the steam engines, and the steam engines weren't talking to the Diesels. Everyone was cross. That afternoon, Thomas had to collect some paint for the bridge. He puffed into the builder's yard to pick up the pots of paint, but Diesel was in the yard too. "Now I'll show Thomas who's best," Diesel whispered, and he gave the freight cars an extra hard shunt. Paint pots flew into the air and splattered down all over Thomas. Thomas looked very silly indeed. Spotty Boiler laughed Diesel, and he rolled away. "I will show those Diesels," Thomas huffed. So the next time Thomas saw Ari, he gave him a biff, and when Ari saw James, he gave him a bash. Soon the Diesels and the Steamies were biffing and banging and being bashed all over the island. The engines were in a terrible mess, and no work had been done. That evening, Sir Topham Hatt came to see the engines. He was very angry. "You have caused confusion and delay, the seaside is still a mess, the bridge isn't painted, and we will not be able to open the airport. No travelers will come to Sodor this year." "No travelers," moaned Thomas, "and no airplanes," groaned Percy. All of the engines knew they had behaved badly, and they were very sad. That night, Thomas had a dream. He was puffing along a misty mountain track, and there was Lady. Lady was a very special steam engine. She worked high up in the mountains. Lady was shunting trucks with Rusty the diesel engine. Thomas was surprised. "We always finish our jobs when we work together," puffed Lady. The next morning when Thomas woke up, he had an idea. First he went straight to see Mavis. Mavis was a kind diesel engine, and Thomas knew she would listen. He told Mavis that he wanted the steam engines and the Diesels to work together. Mavis agreed. It was the only way to get the airport open in time. "Let's have a big meeting with all of the engines at the coaling stop tomorrow," Thomas puffed. Thomas and Mavis went to see the other engines to tell them about the meeting. Thomas told Percy, Mavis told Diesel, then James, then Ari, then Emily, then Bert. The next day, the engines gathered at the coaling stop. The steam engines and the Diesels were all lined up. Thomas blew his whistle. "Steamies and Diesels need to work together," chuffed Thomas. "If the airport doesn't open, it will be bad for all the engines. Both steam engines and diesel engines need passengers and freight to be useful. If we work together, we can get the job done," puffed Thomas. All of the engines agreed. After that, the engines worked harder than ever. They hauled bricks and timber and cleared away debris from the storm. They moved paint and tar and made sure there were enough workers to do each important job, and all the engines were careful not to bump or block each other. Even Diesel 10, the biggest diesel engine of all, agreed to help out. Soon the engines were even enjoying working together, smiling and joking as friends will do. Before long the airport was finished. It had shining buildings and a big tall control tower, and the runway was long and smooth. The engines were very proud and very excited. "I can't wait for the travelers," puffed Thomas. "And look," peeped Percy, "here comes the first airplane." The end. Fun fact. Since 1998, the undisputed largest airport in the world measured by passenger volume is the Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport in the USA. What's more, it continues to grow. In 2017, nearly 104 million passengers were counted. Were you paying close attention to the story? Try the fun quiz. Who was helping Lady in Thomas's dream? The answer is Rusty. Who bumped paint all over Thomas? The answer is Diesel. Who did Thomas explain his plan of working together to first? The answer is Mavis. Fun fact. In the suspension type of bridge, the roadway hangs from strong wires called cables. The main cables hang between two or more towers, smaller cables hang down from the curving main cables, the smaller cables hold up the roadway. Suspension bridges can span longer distances than any other type of modern bridge. The sky over the island of Sodor was usually calm and blue. But one day, as Thomas and Percy were enjoying a ride in the countryside, they saw black clouds of smoke. They knew there was a fire, and they raced to help. An old farm shed was in flames. Thomas and Percy let the farmhands take buckets of water from their tanks. Luckily, a new engine named Belle arrived. She could shoot water from her tanks. The flames fizzled and went out. Everybody agreed that Belle was a really useful engine. Belle was happy to help, but she knew Sodor needed a real fire engine. "You need Flynn the fire engine, he's a real hero," she peeped. Sir Topham Hatt thought this was an excellent idea. The next day, Thomas took Belle on a tour of the island of Sodor. They visited Brendam Docks, Knapford Station, and Thomas's branch line. Belle liked everything she saw. Thomas and Belle didn't ask Percy to go with them on the tour. Diesel noticed that Percy was lonely and slid up next to him. "Thomas is very busy with that new blue engine," Diesel hissed. He invited Percy to visit the Dieselworks. Percy wasn't sure he should go to the Dieselworks. Thomas always said steamies shouldn't puff there, but Thomas didn't seem to care about Percy lately. Percy slowly rolled to the Dieselworks. His axles tingled. "Hello, Percy," boomed Diesel 10. "What an honor, please come in." The Dieselworks was dark, grimy, and a little scary, but the engines were all very nice, especially Den and Dart. They fixed the diesels, but they didn't even have a crane. "You should tell Sir Topham Hatt you need a new Dieselworks," puffed Percy. "He doesn't listen to diesels," said Diesel 10. Percy had an idea. "I'll ask Thomas to tell Sir Topham Hatt, he always listens to Thomas." Diesel 10 smiled. When Percy returned to the steamworks, he saw that Flynn the fire engine had arrived. Everyone was impressed by Flynn because he was bold and red and shiny. Percy felt very unimportant indeed. Only Kevin listened to Percy's story. Kevin couldn't believe the Dieselworks didn't have a crane. "Kevin, if you were there, you'd be a hero," Percy puffed. Kevin liked the idea of being a hero very much. That night, when Percy returned to Tidmouth Sheds, he saw something that made his boiler bubble. Flynn was in his berth. "If I'm not wanted here," Percy thought, "I'll go someplace where they do like me." Percy found Kevin, and together they rolled to the Dieselworks. They stayed there all night, something no steamy had ever done before. Back at the steamworks the next day, Percy told the steam engines where he had been. Everyone was shocked. Thomas's firebox fizzled. Victor was angry that Kevin was still at the Dieselworks. He rattled off to tell Sir Topham Hatt. Percy and Thomas raced to the Dieselworks. Thomas said he would help them get a new building. But Diesel 10 wasn't interested. "Since Victor isn't at the steamworks, we're going to take it over. And we want you to lead us, Percy." Percy proudly led the diesels to the steamworks, but when they got there, no one listened to him. "The steamworks is ours," roared Diesel 10, "and we're not giving it back." Worst of all, Diesel 10 said Thomas was being held prisoner at the Dieselworks. Percy knew he'd made a terrible mistake. He quickly went back to the Dieselworks, where Dan and Dart were holding Thomas. As Percy screeched to a stop, sparks from his wheels started a fire. Now he had to save Thomas and put out a fire. Percy knew that only one engine could help him now. He raced to find Flynn the fire engine. Percy found him at the Sodor Search and Rescue Center. With pistons pumping, the two engines puffed to save Thomas. At the Dieselworks, Percy convinced Dan and Dart to release Thomas. All the engines watched as Flynn boldly pumped water onto the fire. "Hooray for Flynn!" Thomas peeped. "He's a real hero," Percy puffed. The flames hissed and shrank and sputtered out. Thomas and Percy collected all the steamies and hurried to save the steamworks. The Diesels refused to leave. "Taking things and using trickery is wrong," Thomas peeped. "We can help you get a new Dieselworks, but you have to be fair with us." Suddenly Sir Topham had arrived. He was very cross. "Diesel 10," he said sternly, "you have caused confusion and delay. Because of you, none of my engines has been really useful." Diesel 10 whimpered and his claw crumpled. Sir Topham had explained that the Diesels would get a new Dieselworks. "That was always my plan. Everything takes time, and everyone must wait their turn." The Diesels and the Steamies agreed to work together to build the new Dieselworks. When the new Dieselworks was completed, all the engines came together for the grand opening. Sir Topham Hatt was very proud. The new Dieselworks shows what can happen when all kinds of really useful engines work together, he said. Everyone cheered and all the engines peeped proudly. Percy and Thomas were especially happy. They were glad to be best friends again. They giggled and jiggled and puffed with joy. The end. Fun fact. The first fire engines date back to Roman times when they were horse-drawn water pumps. Were you paying close attention to the story? Try the fun quiz. Who put out the fire when the old farm shed was burning? The answer is Belle. What color is Flint? The answer is red. Who did Percy take with him to the Dieselworks? The answer is Kevin the Crane. Fun fact. The first human-made crane was built by the ancient Greeks around 500 BC. It looked very different to the modern cranes we have today. Instead of steel or metal, they were made out of wood. Human or animal power was used to pull heavy objects up, but these early crane designs helped build some of the most recognizable and beautiful structures of the ancient world. It was a fine fall morning on the island of Sodor, and Thomas was looking forward to pulling coaches on his branch line, but Percy was telling ghost stories. "My driver saw the ghost train last night. They say that it appears to engines once in a while as a warning of trouble ahead." "Pooh," said Thomas, "silly Percy. Really useful engines don't have time for ghost stories. I'm not scared." The next evening, Percy was coming home from the harbor. He was humming along the rails, almost to Crow's Farm crossing. Little did Percy know that a cart of flour was stuck on the tracks at the crossing. Percy came upon the cart swiftly in the dark. He smashed it to smithereens in a billowing cloud of white flour. When the dust cleared, Percy was a ghostly white. "Phew," said his driver, "I'm glad no one was hurt, Percy. But you look like a ghost. Let's go get you a washdown." "Let me stay this way," said Percy. I think I know someone who deserves a good scare. On the way home, Percy came upon Toby and convinced him to help scare Thomas. Toby pulled into the yard first and told Thomas Percy's had an accident. Just then, ghostly Percy rolled up making an awful moaning and clanking sound. Thomas was so scared, he hurried out of the yard. Percy and Toby had a good laugh. That will teach Thomas to say I'm a silly engine, said Percy with a smile. Thomas soon figured out that Percy was only fooling about being a ghost, and a couple of days later, when James came home with another scary story, Thomas thought the other engines were still playing tricks on him. I saw spooky lights floating around Rolf's castle tonight, said James. But that castle has been abandoned for years, said Gordon. Maybe it's a ghost, guessed Percy. Pish posh, said Thomas, you won't fool me again. A week went by, and Thomas forgot about silly ghost stories, until he met Bill and Ben at the crossing one morning. Thomas, you won't believe what we saw last night, said Bill. There were ghosts inside Rolf's castle, said Ben. Spooky, said Bill. Creepy, said Ben. And then, said Bill, the signal was green when it should have been red. I almost crashed into Ben. Spooky, said Ben. Creepy, said Bill. Thomas thought that Bill and Ben were probably just teasing, but he was still uneasy. He asked Sir Topham Hatt for routes that would take him far from Rolf's castle. As he was getting ready to take some troublesome trucks to the mine, Gordon came chugging up. Thomas, why are you going to the mine? Asked Gordon. Are you afraid of Rolf's castle? I'm not afraid of anything, wheezed Thomas, and he chuffed away. I'll show him, said Thomas. Scaredy cat, sang the trucks. Thomas didn't know it, but the mines were a dangerous place. Long ago, miners had made tunnels, and some of their roofs were not strong enough to hold up an engine, even one as small as Thomas. There were danger signs everywhere. But Thomas was still stung by Gordon's and the truck's taunts. I'm not afraid of a silly old sign, thought Thomas. To prove he wasn't afraid, Thomas bumped some empty trucks fiercely, sending them right through a sign and onto the siding beyond. Thomas foolishly followed the trucks right onto the dangerous siding. Hurrah, laughed Thomas, there's nothing to be scared of. Just then, the rails started to quiver. The track gave way, and Thomas sank into the mine. Gordon had to be sent to pull Thomas out of the hole. Thanks, Gordon, said Thomas. I was just trying to prove I wasn't scared of anything. That's okay, said Gordon. I'm sorry I made fun of you. Thomas decided that being foolish was not the same as being brave, so when Sir Topham Hatt needed an engine to pull a special ride to Rolf's castle, Thomas volunteered. He wanted to be a really useful engine. As Thomas started off for the castle, night was falling and fog was rolling in. Thomas was very afraid, but he chugged on bravely. Ahead in the fog, he saw an eerie glow. It's a ghost, he thought, just like the one James saw. But as Thomas came up the hill, a brisk wind blew and the fog cleared. Thomas saw that there was no ghost at all, it was just the fog man with his lantern. Thomas realized that James hadn't seen a ghost after all, just lanterns in the fog. But what were lanterns doing in an abandoned castle? Although the fog had blown away, the moon was still behind the clouds. When Thomas saw something white fluttering up ahead, he was sure it was the ghost this time. Don't be scared, he huffed to himself. Thomas chugged bravely on and realized that the fluttering white thing was curtains. Well, bust my boiler, Thomas thought. Maybe the ghosts Bill and Ben saw were just curtains. What is going on here? It was all a mystery. When Thomas approached the signal near the castle, it was flashing red, then green, then red again. "That's funny," said Thomas to the signalman. Bill and Ben were having problems with this same signal the other night. But Thomas wasn't scared anymore. He thought he might have an idea what was going on at the castle. He asked the signalman, "Are there people moving into the castle?" "No, but your guess is close," said the signalman. "They are restoring the castle, and the electrical work they are doing has been causing my signal to go haywire." "But Thomas, you'd better move on, they're expecting that load you're pulling." When Thomas finally arrived at Ralph's castle, Sir Topham Hatt was there getting ready for a big party to celebrate the reopening of the castle. Thomas was relieved that there was nothing to be scared of after all. He was also proud to have figured out the mystery. "Thomas," said Sir Topham Hatt, "you have been brave and clever. You are a really useful engine." The end. Fun fact: square-shaped castles were easier to attack, as the enemy could dig tunnels under the corners to make them collapse. Were you paying close attention to the story? Try the fun quiz. What was in the cart that Percy crashed into? The answer is flour. Who pulled Thomas out of the hole he rode into? The answer is Gordon. Who told Thomas that the castle was being restored? The answer is the signalman. Fun fact: the overwhelming consensus of science is that there is no proof that ghosts exist. Thomas and Percy were helping to build a new search and rescue center on the island of Sodor. There was much work to do. "It will be made of the strongest wood of all," Joby Wood said Sir Topham Hatt. "The wood will arrive today at Brendam Docks." Diesel tried to move the logs by himself and had a terrible accident. Luckily, Thomas saved Diesel, but the logs fell into the sea. Sir Topham Hatt was proud of Thomas. He asked Thomas to travel to the mainland and bring back more Joby wood. Percy was worried that the trip would be dangerous. A steamboat pulled Thomas on a raft toward the mainland. Far out at sea, Thomas heard a loud crack. Fizzling fireboxes, he peeped. The chain to the steamboat has snapped. The next morning, Thomas found himself on a strange island. It was very misty. He peeped hello, but nobody answered, so he went exploring. Suddenly, Thomas came fender to fender with three strange engines. Their names were Bash, Dash, and Ferdinand, and they called themselves the Logging Locos. Bash told Thomas he was on Misty Island. Meanwhile, everyone on Sodor was looking for Thomas. Sir Topham Hatt and Captain raced out to sea. Percy searched every track. Harold took to the sky. Back on Misty Island, Bash, Dash, and Ferdinand showed Thomas where they lived. It was an old logging camp filled with winding tracks and rickety cabins. Thomas made an amazing discovery. "This camp is filled with Joby wood," he peeped. "That's the wood we need to build the search and rescue center." Thomas told the Logging Locos all about the rescue center. They agreed to help him collect the logs. But the Logging Locos didn't like working. They just wanted to play games and bounce on Shake Shake Bridge. Thomas definitely did not like the Wibbly Wobbly Bridge. Old Wheezy the giant log loader wasn't much help either. He liked to throw logs, not stack them. After much biffing and bashing, Thomas had flatbeds full of Joby logs, but he didn't know how to get back to Sodor. Bash told him about an old tunnel that connected Misty Island to Sodor. Pushing their flatbeds full of logs, the engines reached the old tunnel. It was cold and dark. The logging locos were scared. "Don't worry," peeped Thomas. "With a whir and a whiff, we'll be on the island of Sodor." Suddenly, with a rumble and a crash, there was a cave-in. Rocks tumbled down around the engines. They were trapped, and no one knew where they were. Thomas saw a hole in the roof of the tunnel. He sent up puffs of steam. Thomas hoped someone would see the puffs and come to the rescue. Somebody did see the steam puffs. "Percy!" "It's Thomas," Percy peeped excitedly. "He's on Misty Island, and he needs help." Whiff told Percy about an old tunnel that led to Misty Island. Percy knew it would be dangerous, but it was the fastest way to save Thomas. Percy raced through the tunnel. It was dark and twisty. At last he found the cave-in. "Watch out, Thomas," Percy puffed. "I'm going to push back the rocks." Percy rocked and rolled and pumped his pistons. Crash! Percy broke through the boulders. Thomas and the logging locos were saved. Sir Topham Hatt was very happy that Thomas and his new friends were safe. And with all the new Joby wood, the rescue center would be finished very soon. Today is a special day made possible by very special engines, Sir Topham Hatt said at the opening of the Search and Rescue Center. The people cheered, the engines all peeped. Thomas's pistons pumped with pride. The end. Fun fact. Opened in 2016, the Gotthard Base Tunnel is a 35.5-mile railway tunnel that passes through the Swiss Alps. It is the world's longest rail tunnel and the first low-level flat route through the Alps. Were you paying close attention to the story? Try the fun quiz. What were the 3 new engines that Thomas met on Misty Island called? The answer is Bash, Dash, and Ferdinand. Who took Sir Topham Hatt out to sea to look for Thomas? The answer is Captain. Who helped rescue Thomas in the tunnel? The answer is Percy. Fun fact. As of 2014, the search for the missing airplane Flight 370 had become the largest search and rescue to date. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Remember to like and subscribe for free to the Telltale channel and click the notification bell for more stories, quizzes, and fun facts. Check out the channel's playlist for more Telltale stories and fairy tales.